John Moore in the Halifax waterfront, joined by International Scouting's Chris Mooring, and we're going to talk about the draft, the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League draft in Shawinigan, June the 2nd, Chris. And let's talk about this draft. Begin by telling us just how deep a draft is it?
I think it's a deep draft as far as the Atlantic Canada goes. I'm not sure that it's a high-end draft. Typically we would have probably 5 or 6 guys in the first round from Atlantic Canada. I don't see that being the case this year. I think it's more like 2 to 4 at the maximum. So it's, although looking at how deep it is from a top 100 guys that can contribute from Atlantic Canada, I think that's probably pretty normal. We might see between 25 and 30 in the first 100 players being taken for the first 5 rounds.
Chicoutimi with the first overall pick. Last year, Rimouski taking Alexis Lafreniere first overall. The general consensus was he would go number 1. What about this year?
I think there is a bit of a consensus that the Henrik Laperriere will go first, but there's a couple of players that are not far behind him. Patrick Gay and William Villeneuve from Quebec as well. Those are the kind of the 3 top guys that our guys like in Quebec. So I don't see anybody from Atlantic going in that group, but we could have guys sneak in somewhere between 3 and 5.
Which leads me to wonder who might be the first Atlantic Canadian taken in this draft.
Well, personally, I think it's going to be Lukas Cormier from New Brunswick. He's a dynamic offensive defenseman. Really, there's not a lot of weaknesses in his game except for maybe he's on the small side. He really thinks the game well and is dynamic from the back end. So I think he'll be the first guy taken. But there's a second guy there that's pretty close to him as well. He's a dynamic offensive forward. He's playing away, so a lot of people probably didn't get to see him much this year. Yeah. But he's in prep school in the States. Josh Lawrence.
Yeah, Fredericton, I believe, a Fredericton native.
Yeah.
All right. So what about as far as the island, Prince Edward Island goes? Is there a player that the first Islander who might be selected, and where might he go?
That's a good question. I think Charlie DeRoche is from the island originally, but he's played away as well in prep school. He would be the first kid, I think, from PEI that would go. He's on the smaller side, offensive defenseman, maybe even a two-way guy, I would say. He's likely going to grow a little bit more than he's currently at. I think his brother's close to 6 foot or 6'1". So I expect he will grow a little bit, and he'll be able to take care of the back end as well as he takes care of the offensive side of the game. He's an interesting prospect. I think he's one of those guys that I think ISS may be higher on than some, but he's just so smart and so mobile and thinks the game on both ends of the ice so well that I wouldn't be surprised if he's a top 2 round pick.
As for Nova Scotians, and of course I've had a chance to follow the Nova Scotia Major Midget Hockey League closely this past winter, but who do you see as the first Nova Scotia taken in this draft?
It'd likely be Drover out of Halifax. There's a couple guys that are kind of the top end. The defenseman from Dartmouth as well could threaten that, be that first guy. Big defenseman. Ben Rood, yep. But Drover really is improved. Shown a lot of improvement this year from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, and I think just in that natural scorer that he is, that all teams kind of covet, he'll likely be the first guy to go from those 2 guys, out of those 2 guys.
So Drover potentially, is he a first round pick?
He could be a first round pick. I think it's either late first or early second. It really depends on the depth out of Quebec, and Quebec's looking like it's a little deeper, than we are for sure this year. So, yeah, I would think he's likely a late first round, maybe second round, early second.
Also, Newbridge Academy this year. 3 players, which I understand certainly stepped to the forefront. There would be Alexander David, the forward, Nico Savoy, the defenseman, and the goaltender, a Fredericton native, Ethan Pearson.
I also like Lynch there. There's a big defenseman that plays on that team as well. That's quite good. But those 3 guys are of course, we have them ranked higher than the big defenseman Lynch. But he's starting with David, I guess, or David. He's a interesting prospect. I had him ranked as a first rounder earlier in the year. I think he's kind of tailed off from that. He's likely going to be a second rounder. But he's a very good offensive forward, plays center and wing, probably better off suited at center, can score, sees the ice really well, makes plays, competes really hard. I like his compete level. So I think he's likely the first guy out of those 4 guys that I are probably top 100 picks. There's actually another defenseman there that's pretty good too, but we won't talk about him right now. And then if we go to the defenseman Savoy, he's a good 2-way player, and he's actually probably improved more this year and has raised his draft stock than David has. I see him as being kind of that top 3, 2-way defenseman in the queue, and David as being a maybe a first line guy, but definitely a second line guy type center. I think he's going to be. Both those players are going to be really good impact type players at the Q level. So I'm thinking both of those guys go second round, but one of those guys might sneak into the first as well, depending on how deep and how the Maritime teams pick versus the Quebec teams. There's always that kind of thing. They might take a Maritime player with equal over a Quebec player, and vice versa for Quebec. So it either one of those players could slip into the first round, but they're likely going to be second round picks. And then the goaltender Pearson is he really impressed me. A couple showings this year. I thought he's the best Atlantic Canadian anyway for goalie for the draft. But there's a guy not far behind him too, Savoy out of New Brunswick, who's also playing prep school. So Pearson is very technical, very athletic. Really reads the game well, which I think is maybe his best attribute, is his hockey sense and how he sees the game, and his positioning is so spot on. So I think he's a player that could be a second round pick as well. And I don't see him sneaking into the first round. It's hard to take a goaltender in the first round, but he looks like a second round pick.
All right, Chris, well, I spent a lot of time in the Nova Scotia Major Midget Hockey League rinks, and 3 players I want to get your thoughts on going into the draft. Dartmouth's Steel Subaru forward Ben Allison, Chase Ellis from the Cape Breton West program, and Sonny Cabate from the Cape Breton Tradesman.
Okay, first of all, I guess Allison is a player that we had some skating concerns with him earlier in the year. I think that's come around, and it's not as much of a concern anymore. My read on Allison is that he's a really smart 2-way player. I think he's going to really fit into a middle 6 kind of role in the queue. I think he's going to be an impact type player, a leader on his team. I think his upside, as I say, is kind of that middle 6. I think he can play both center and wing. He's probably better suited at wing maybe early in his career, but he'll likely be a center by the time he's finished his career in the Quebec League, because he's so smart in 2 ways. Just he needs to improve his skating a little bit more, and then they can kind of hide that a little bit on the wing for the first part of his career in the queue. So I think he's likely a third round type of pick, but could be an impact kind of player, type of guy that you win with. Cabate is a little bit of a wild card. He's dynamic. He's got some offensive ability and some skill set. He's gone on the small side, and he needs to grow, and he needs to fill out a bit to play. But he could be a really good 18, 19, 20-year-old in the league, and an offensive contributor, in the top 2 line kind of role. So he's likely in that third, fourth round type discussion in the queue as well. And then if we're looking at Chase Ellis, Chase, as you know, was an underager, has had exceptional status in the Quebec League, or in the midget league. He and then went off to play prep school. But he's a player that's developed, I think, as far as a player. I don't know if he's as much offensive as that we originally had thought early in his career. I think he's leveled off a little bit, but he's a big, strong, player that can play in corners, and he's got a knack for scoring in and around the net. So he's a player that's probably going to be a little bit of a work in progress when he comes into the league. But he'll probably step in and play kind of a bottom six type role to start off with, and work his way up a lineup as he contributes on the offensive side. And I think he will. I think that it's just going to take maybe a little bit longer with him as far as to contribute on the offensive side. I think he's going to have to get comfortable with the league. But he'll play a role before that. I think a team will likely look at him in that 4 through 5 round type player. Because I think, as I say, he's maybe the ceiling is not as high as we have first originally thought on him, but he could prove us all wrong too. It's scouting. We're at the we're trying to project these kids as kids, and they they can prove us wrong all the time. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops. But he's an interesting prospect because of the size and the ability to make room for himself out there, and a lot of teams will be looking for that type of player. So he might even go higher than 4th or 5th round. So it'll be interesting to see.
Chris, we appreciate your time, appreciate your insight. We'll see what happens on June the 2nd at the Gervais Auto Centre in Shawinigan. Thanks for this.
Hey, no problem, John. Anytime.
Chris Mooring is with International Scouting Services. John Moore reporting for sportsandmore.com from the Halifax waterfront.